Basically, like if the team is able to have at the one-to-one level, like single direct relationships with each other, if those are good and they're good across,
Yep.
then the team just kind of just works.
When you work inside a highly technical organization like aerospace, software, or energy storage, so many of the discussions around both problems and solutions end up talking about the technical side. It's almost as if we gloss over the very thing that often prevents you from meeting those challenges or allows you to find the solution, which is people and the relationships between people. Today on the Leadership Launchpad, my guest is Jeff Guido, Senior Director of New Missions at Planet. He is not only responsible for leading some of the most cutting edge missions the company is currently embarking on, he's also responsible for coaching and leading many others who are leading their own missions. In this conversation, we talk a lot about delegation, empowering your team, but most importantly, the power of focusing on relationships and building trust if you want to be an effective leader. Before we get into the discussion, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening to the show, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you happen to be someone responsible for developing leaders in your organization, I would love to talk to you. Please reach out to me at matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can figure out how to make the leaders in your organization better. With that, let's get into the discussion with Jeff Guido. Jeff, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
Great, Matt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great because we've been trying to have this sit down for a while. Most of the time, it's been my fault. I kept forgetting to follow up on getting the schedule because you're such a busy person. Right now, you've been particularly busy these last few months. I'd love for you to briefly describe what you do.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, happy to talk about that. And all of us are busy all the time. I think one of the
Sure.
ways in which, I get criticized on a regular basis by friends and family. I'm always in motion, trying to always be moving, and so part of that is just like feeling like I'm always scheduled to the hilt on everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just a way to feel useful and a way to feel like you're doing something worthwhile. So, but as far as what I'm doing now, happy to talk about that. So I work at a company called Planet Labs. We currently have the largest Earth imaging constellation that's ever existed. We have over 200 satellites currently in operation in low Earth orbit, and we have launched over 600 satellites in our decade-long history. Now, those numbers that I'm throwing around right now used to be superlative in how large they were, but we've been recently passed up by
Yeah.
another company or two that that you're familiar with, and that is okay. We're still doing great things, and really excited about the work there. Currently, what I work on is I'm a what's called a mission director, or it's basically someone that is more involved or more has their arms around an entire commercial space mission. And I lead a team of program managers, systems engineers, commercial folks that transition a brand new mission from incubation all the way to actual delivery of data to customers. In addition to that, my other hat is to actually lead the team of mission directors. So, in addition to having my own program, I also help coach and lead mission directors in their own programs as well. And these are some of the main missions that we have at Planet. This is Pelican, Tanager, new missions that are still in incubation, as well as other things that we have on the horizon. Yeah, I know you want to talk about some of those things, so that's part of what we're here to discuss in terms of how to manage teams of leaders, as well as
Yeah.
like coaching them so they can execute effectively within their environment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's been, we've known each other for several years now, and it's been neat to kind of watch your trajectory through Planet, just on a personal note, just knowing you. And
Yeah.
so, when I talk with engineers, when people make that transition from, being like a technical person or you're an individual contributor in any capacity into a leadership role, the most common difficulty that I hear is how to make that switch from kind of like the doer, the person actually getting things done to the person helping people get things done. And so from your level, you made that transition, but now I'm sure you see a lot of others make that transition. I guess to ask in both of those situations, how did you make that transition, and what kind of techniques do you, when you're coaching people, how do you coach people to make that transition?
Yeah, no, it's a good call. I mean, we often think about, I'll just say up front that we often look at people with a lot of technical skill that are effective in their roles, and I think it's a very common thing, at least in our professional cultures that we exist in, to be like that person should lead, that person should be a manager. I think first, before you even cross that divide, is make sure that's part of that person's career desires, what they want, their
Yeah.
objectives. I think we often just peg people as like they're doing great as an engineer, they should be a manager, but that logic doesn't always make sense. It makes sense a lot of the time, and like most people want to have that type of prestige associated with their role, but some people also just want to continue making cool stuff. I think that discussing that with the individual, making sure you have a clear career plan with them, is absolutely one of the ways to unlock success early on or to avoid setting them up for failure. But once that decision has been made and you're starting to go through that transition, the ways that to transition from doing your own thing to having others do them out, it's there's a couple of frameworks you could use, but basically when it's your own work that you've been working on for a while, like it's a project that you've invested a ton of time and energy into,
Yeah.
it can be pretty hard to start to hand that away. We as professionals have a lot of pride in the things that we have done, and this is just something that a lot of people need to know. They need to evolve within their careers. So the culture should be that we are continuously establishing a path to gradually transfer responsibility and work to junior folks. And if you can make that a part of like we should always be developing and evolving our people,
Mm.
that can build a virtuous cycle that makes the organization much stronger in the long run. In general, if you want to take this from almost like start to finish, though, I could walk through a couple of things that I do. Like first of all, I
Yeah.
hire deliberately for a role that normally has a little bit more narrow scope than what I hope that person will grow into in the
Okay.
long run. And the reason why is we can't look around every corner and anticipate every way in which that role will evolve. So having something where they can have like their core thing that they're delivering on, but then as opportunities present themselves, they're able to take them or not take them depending on what the needs that they have in the program are themselves. After someone is selected, I like to use things like 30, 60, 90 plans to onboard them. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that's a term you're familiar with, but basically in the first 30
Yeah.
days, you're supposed to learn. The next 30 days, you're supposed to contribute. And by the final 30 days, you're basically doing the job. And we will write down these plans together. And we do this at Planet. But even if we write them down together and talk about them at the 30-day point, I honestly don't really remember to do it after that. And neither do they.
Yeah.
And that's okay because really
Yeah.
what it's about is setting those expectations up front
Yeah.
and showing them the path to being a fully contributing member of the team. And I think the temptation is strong once you get a new person in to like dump a whole bunch of work on them. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't, even though the question or the prompt that you had was how do you get others to do the work that you've been doing? Like even though that temptation can be strong and you're a manager, you find yourself as a new manager and you're like, oh, I could finally get rid of some of these things. You want to make sure to have some restraint here because you don't want to set the tone for the new person or the junior
Yeah.
folks that are starting to join your team of like a feeling of franticness, build that emotional safety into their early days so that they understand and see how you're measured as a leader and
Yeah.
will give them work as they grow into it, as the team grows into it together. Um, building
I'd
that.
actually
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'd actually love to pause you on that point because I do
Uh,
think the point you bring up is a great one, and there's kind of that delicate balance because I think I've seen some research that talks about how kind of like the faster you can get a new employee to feel like they're having an impact on the team, the stronger the bond is going to be with them, like the more engaged they're going to be because you're getting this person at like their most engaged, right? If you think about right after somebody starts on a team, like that is the most engaged they may ever be, and so
yeah.
you want to take advantage of that. And so when you think about, can absolutely respect the idea of like you set up the 30, 60, 90, but it's kind of like just like that first 30 is really what you're going to be looking at.
Mhm.
How do you think about, you said, in your first 30 days you're learning, do you try, is that truly it, or do you ever think about, without overwhelming them, like trying to find small things that maybe they can really bite into early on?
Yeah, it's a good redirect and a good point. The small things that they can do, that's if you're truly expecting nothing from them in the first 30 days, I think they're gonna get bored.
Yeah.
So in my work environment, there's a perennial problem. There are too many things to do all the time. I am happy to sign people up for meetings. I want them to hand them small, hey, can you set up this next thing or take these actions and try and like find the right people to go solve that. Absolutely is
Hmm.
that's part of the learning process. But what I do want to protect them from is maybe this is a facet of where I work, but it does sometimes feel like it can be a little bit more frantic and more chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
and want to provide that sort of structure early
Yeah.
on so they are running in the right direction without
Yeah.
burning themselves out too early. It
Yeah.
hasn't been a problem in this context either because the people that we're hiring were lucky and fortunate that they're all really self-motivated and driven.
Yep.
So don't
Yep.
actually have to like, it's more of like a hanging on to or bounding the problems early on so that it's energy put in the vector that you want them to go and not just energy
Mm-hmm.
expended in all directions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think your point about them being most engaged early on, makes a ton of sense, and that's when they have the most time too. I do think that there's an opportunity there to make sure to use that time to build in the foundation for the most basic cultural things that we want them to
Yeah.
take with them in their full duration at our company.
Makes
Um,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, after about 90 days though, they're pretty much running, and so
Yeah.
from that point, I do like to use like a more player coach type of model. Where we're happy to jump in at any time to play alongside them in whatever game metaphor we're using. But in the long run, it should be more of a coaching approach where you want them to bring the effort and do the things that they need to do and feel empowered and that they're owning the situation. You're having to come in over on the top every time, and that's been real effective to build proficiency and a way of doing things that work within the culture of the company, as well as do it in the way that I mean, like me as the manager think is the proper way to execute. And this is
Yeah.
mostly in the context of program execution when
Yeah.
I'm talking about this. Yeah.
Yeah. You use the word empowerment because I think that it's one thing to delegate. It's one thing to like, hey, go do this task or tell people what to do. But then
Hmm.
I feel like it's that next level of like, okay, like what do I need to give you? What barriers do need to remove? What resources do I need to give you? How do you think about how involved to be and what resources to give in order to help them be effective and empower folks?
Yeah. The general rule that I'll apply in all these cases, and I'll get more in depth here, is the general rule is to try and delegate decision authority to the level
Yeah.
below you.
Yeah.
I've heard folks say, and I do mostly subscribe to this
Interesting.
perspective as well. Delegate as low as possible, which I generally think is the right approach. But like, I have control over the level beneath me, and I'll leave it to. And if I'm really am giving them like true decision authority, then they can decide if that decision authority can go lower than them. But uh, one way that I have been able to transition from someone that's doing a lot of the work to someone that's having others do the work, thereby opening up a lot of my bandwidth and capacity for other things, or to rise up to a more strategic level, has been to ask my reports to make these decisions for certain program things or things that are clearly within their scope, and continue to push that down every time. Now, it's one thing to just say, here, you make the decision, but I want it to be something that it's understood on a regular basis. This is the scope of their authority. And you can say that over and over again, but I think you also have to show up to meetings, to social engagements, depending on how you want to say them, there be they meetings, hallway conversations, whatever they are in the professional workspace, and show up with a little bit of courage and willingness to stand up for your folks that need that empowerment, because there are always going to be people that are trying to, everyone's trying their best, but that are always trying to have their own influence applied on a particular situation.
Hmm.
And I think what we're really talking about is, leading with influence here, because empowerment can flow through that influence, but there's also a whole lot of empowerment that flows through some of the more harder ways of doing it, like people that have higher fire authority, that have
Mm-hmm.
budget assigned to them and can make decisions on how budget is
Mm-hmm.
allocated or actual signatory authority. Those are all things
Mm-hmm.
that I think companies and governments control really closely, but I don't think that's really what you're asking about. You're asking about the kind of the other side of it, leading with influence, which relies heavily on soft skills, how you aggregate information, how you guide that communication. Could definitely be a double-edged sword there, because if you're seen as constraining in communication, it can certainly undermine your credibility and influence. But do it in the right way, and if you're inclusive, it, you can influence can be oftentimes much more effective than the much more
Yeah.
blunt instruments such as higher fire budget and signatory
Yeah.
authority.
Yeah.
With my team, I make a point of outlining what I do think their scope of decision-making authority is. They do this in one-on-ones, and even if it can be a full contact sport sometimes with other teams or other stakeholders, knowing your like unique way of like approaching these situations allows you to represent your equities in a professional, sincere way. A little bit of courage as well, but I've often found that like applying that courage makes it so that you can get what you need, and have more often been rewarded positively for being a bit vulnerable in situations to advocate for my people.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah,
When you
yeah. Go ahead.
say, just really quickly, when you say one of the things that you really focus on doing is kind of reinforcing where their scope of decision making is, do you mean by that that you're finding that typically is it that you're trying to push people to make the decision, or are people trying to like overreach and then you're having to rein them in? Like is it more that you're just having to say like, no, remember you have the authority to do this, no, I want you to make the decision? Is that kind of the drumbeat that you have to keep reminding people of?
Yeah, I don't often have to rein folks in. I
Yeah.
do think this is a cultural thing as well with our company,
Mm-hmm.
is we do have a lot of decision making by consensus. And
Mm-hmm.
while that can work really well a lot of the time, and it's a can be an effective way to garner alignment, if
Mm-hmm.
costly from a time perspective sometimes, it does sometimes leave things stalled. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able to make clear, and we're getting better at this at our company, where we collectively can recognize that someone needs to make a decision. If we can make that clear in a social setting or even one-on-one, then usually people fall in line at our
Yeah.
company when someone's just willing to be like, we need to do it this way for this and this, open to feedback on this decision, but we have to move forward. And generally that works pretty well. I
Yeah.
don't normally have to, as a manager, reinforce that to my reports very often. I do think that's partially their personality, they understand. But
Yep.
when you have like satellite A that's in production or doing things, to make a decision on a supply chain issue or a
Yeah.
manufacturing flaw or something like that doesn't touch satellite B, which is a totally different satellite. Those mission directors that are over those missions, I mean, it's pretty straightforward how to do that. And then if there's a prioritization issue, which is definitely something that we have come across quite a few times, I expect those mission directors, as I've told them, to work it out among themselves if they need to figure out how to
Hmm.
prioritize resources. And then only then, if there's like a need for a tiebreaker, then we all have a conversation about it and I can weigh in on being the
Yeah.
tiebreaker. Or my boss
Yeah.
sometimes does that too.
Yeah.
And that's how we've navigated some really tricky situations where you only have so many people that can work on the manufacturing floor at any given time. Being able to say, no, you should be working on satellite A instead of satellite B has helped us to stick pretty well with timelines and make it clear to the team as far as how they should be applying their effort most effectively. So that's been really helpful. And one final thing I'll say on this and on empowerment is that from time to time I'll disagree with my people and the decision that
Yeah.
they want to make. But
Yeah.
I think like if you want to maintain empowerment, you can't overrule them in the situation that you disagree. Now, of course, there are limits to that.
Yep.
There's definitely times where I certainly have to step in, but like for the most part, if I disagree with their decision or direction, you can do a lot more damage to their empowerment by overruling them on a regular basis than you can by just
Yeah.
sort of like sustaining that and just committing to the course of action, and then also committing to learning from it if it doesn't go well. And oftentimes I'm more more often than not pleased that I let them make the decision because they're closer to the situation, so they understand the
Yep.
nuance better than I do, and they have a
Yep.
deeper understanding of the issue as well.
Yep.
I've often found that it's just best to let people retain their agency,
Yeah.
and through that we found greatness as a team. Yeah.
That Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm reminded of it's usually used in a different context. This concept of disagree and commit is
Hmm.
usually used more in a context of like peers or something. But I think it applies here, and the way that I mean it to apply is one of the challenges that I always had with this disagree and commit is that okay, so we've reached a disagreement. And now we're going to commit, but it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of guidance of to which direction to go.
Hmm.
And the last company I worked at, they just talked about it's just simple like who's going to be more closely affected by the decision,
Hmm.
and so in this, and that's I think how it applies to your cases is the people below you are probably are they're the ones closer to it, as you said, but then they're also going to be the ones probably most directly affected by it. And so if there is a disagreement, it's probably better for you to side with them anyway,
Hmm.
with that kind of methodology.
I think that's right. And on the disagree and commit side, I was ruminating on this recently. I think that when, there's another model that's kind of similar, but I think can be applied. There's praise in public, punish in
Yep.
private type of thing. And I think a
Yep.
similar to that applies here. If I disagree and commit in a public way with one of my reports, that also undermines their empowerment. And they're going to use that or even like unintentionally, that's going to go into their feedback loop and how they make decisions in the future and be like, well, I don't want to
Mm,
have my boss say disagree and commit to me because then I'm gonna maybe would make a different decision or be biased in the future if I'm at risk of them saying
interesting.
that. I do think that disagree and commit can be really useful um,
Mm-hmm.
in managing upward. And
Yeah.
I have used that from time to time
Yeah.
with my management in a more private setting, like a small group
Yeah.
of more senior leaders. I'm
Yeah.
happy to say I don't agree, but I'm going to do whatever you all decide, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to fully commit to it. When it's coming downward, it has a different vibe to it, and so I try and
Yeah, I could see
stay
that.
away from that language when I'm the senior person or my report is the one that's obviously making the decision.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Well, then, if we take this to the final level, because I know, especially in some of the things you're doing now, I think you're working much more truly in that, leading with influence, where you're working with potentially organizations outside of your company, and there truly is not a lot of formal authority, but you're all having to work together. And I think this
Hmm.
happens. This can happen between companies. This can happen between teams of companies. What are some of the techniques maybe that you've personally used to manage those kinds of relationships and make sure that they're effective?
This is a good question. And this is something I've really. It's interesting, Matt, because I think when we were trained as officers, words like relationships and relationship building were used like constantly, all the time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I did not appreciate the strength behind them and really like maybe the wisdom is probably a better word for it
Yeah.
of what was being conveyed to me when
Yeah.
I was on active duty. But when it was only when I started working the Tanager program at Planet, our hyperspectral mission, that I really started to understand the true wisdom behind this and how you could leverage relationships to be something that made or break the mission or made you successful or didn't. Um, and so, like you say, now I'm at a time in my career where these things matter more. And um, I think the relationships themselves, just to kind of like pull the thread on that, they really make up the fabric of a team. And if that team
Yeah.
is going to be effective, we'll get into more tactics in a second or how we do that. But basically, like if the team is able to have at the one-to-one level, like single direct relationships with each other, if those are good and they're good across,
Yep.
then the team just kind of just works. But if
Yep.
they don't, or even if you have just a couple of weak links in that fabric, to continue to use that metaphor, I find myself spending a lot of time repairing feelings and egos, and it's just it makes work a grind and a bear. And so as a result, I've learned not only for myself but for my reports to be like, this is a core responsibility of yours. This is a core expectation that you invest in and build the relationships with all of the closest people that you work with. Like it doesn't have to be everyone.
Yeah.
Like we just
Yeah.
like there's just a fundamental drop off in our ability to do that as humans. But the core people you work with, you got to have good relationships with them. And
Yeah.
I think personally, I think relationship building happens best in person when people are solving challenging problems together. But we live in a world where we've derived a lot of value from virtual work or doing
Mhm.
Zoom or things like that. So as a result, we need to build in the opportunities for people to build those relationships remotely, and then still bring people together quarterly or twice a year or whatever, so they can have a meal together or solve some deep strategic problems together in the same
Yeah.
room. And so we do a lot of that at Planet, where while we have a strong push to come into the office regularly, we've also hired people all over the world across many different time zones. So we have this sort of like hybrid approach where we try and bring in our remote people on a regular basis to the office so
Yep.
we can have on-sites or at least just work together occasionally. And it's I think this all sounds nice and fun and warm and fuzzy, but like the real reason, the real output of why we're doing this is to build trust. And I think that like at the
Yep.
most fundamental level, if you don't have trust, that's what makes those links between the people not be sustainable. I value or I like or appreciate Patrick Lencioni's work. And
Yep.
I mostly think in this context, I mostly think about his five dysfunctions of a team. When I say trust, and that's the lowest level of his framework. But if you can't get that trust level done, then you really can't go anywhere else as a group. But once that's set and people have a requisite level of that and they're building trust, then I think you can build other structures upon that foundation, such as like what are the roles and responsibilities of the team, how does decision making happen, accountability for work and quality of work and timeliness, and
Yeah.
then allow for like a organically driven division of labor. So you don't have to have the whole team show up to every meeting. Like if people trust that
Yeah.
other people are doing the things that they need to
Yes.
do, and then that they'll let me know or let their peer know when they need to know something, then that's time that I then get back to go do other things or do some deep work or something like that allows us to be more effective as a team. And that's
100%.
kind of where we've derived value from that. So just to kind of like recap, make it clear to folks that they have to build trust. That's part of their job. That's through building those relationships. Build in the time to do that, and then like come together physically as a group occasionally so that you can do that in person. And through that,
Yeah.
there's like a basis or like almost like a flywheel, I guess, to actually like solving problems because you have
Yeah.
some of that context of what each person wants and who they are, and it helps smooth a lot of issues. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I do think it's something that's particularly challenging when you're making that first transition, especially for technical individual contributors. If you think so much about the technical side of things to forget that people side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I know Andreessen Horowitz, one of the biggest VC firms in the world, they do this where they're primarily distributed, but they come together quarterly for meetups. I've worked with the X Prize Foundation. They're the same way. They're a very distributed team, but they make sure quarterly they have in-person meetups because that's what provides the glue that allows you to work together so much more smoothly for the rest of the time. And I also think I always find it funny. It's interesting that you mentioned the military background because I think typically people think of the military as extremely hierarchical and giving orders and everything
Mm-hmm.
like that. And that's true, but I mean, Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL, now author and leadership consultant, he always says how like he doesn't remember a single time where he said, "I order you to do this." Like that's not actually how most of the military
Yeah.
functions. It really is all about the relationships. The kind of step ahead that the military tends to have is there's a built-in layer of trust of everybody's made a certain commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's committed in some way to a very specific mission, and that's one thing that maybe you have to get a little bit clearer on, be a little bit more deliberate about in the corporate environment, because depending on the company, maybe they're very mission driven, or maybe it's just a job, or maybe it's a stepping stone to somewhere else. So people can be there for all kinds of different reasons. And so then that's you as the manager having to find that common foundation so that you can build those relationships on top of it. And it's really interesting. I
Yeah.
like it.
No, I like that recap. It's good. And I think you're totally right with the military side. I don't think I ever uttered that sentence. That's an order, other than
Yeah.
like is a joke,
In jest, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like it can be so ridiculous and you've failed in
Yes.
some fundamental way as a leader, or it's a really extreme situation. Like, I mean, let's give some space for that. But in
Yeah.
the regular day to day, like there's almost no reason to do that if you've done your homework beforehand and building the team, building the relationships. So 100% agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Jeff. I know I'm always following the work that Planet is doing, watching you all. It's great reading Ashley Vance's book, When the Heavens Went on Sale, and seeing kind of the backstory. It really helped me appreciate what you all are doing and what you're hoping to do in the future. And then, yeah, it's been great knowing you. I think this has been a really good conversation. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
your time.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I always enjoy it. It's always fun talking with you, even offline, like just sort of like shooting ideas back and forth on how to lead properly. So thank you for your time and the invite.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.